Let me in. Let's talk about it. Let me in.
You're my friend.
Let me in.
Chased in the Woods. These two encounters took place about 40 miles south of Plattsburgh, New York, and man, were they crazy. I was walking with two friends looking for one of my other friend's brother. We were walking down an abandoned Lake Champlain and Maria railroad track bed. It was approximately 1:30 in the morning, and I heard a god-awful screaming noise coming from over the bank on the south side of the old rail bed, and we could hear that metal was being ripped and thrown around. Over that bank, there were a series of junked-out cars, some Subarus and an early 60s Chevy station wagon. One of my friends uttered the obligatory, "What the fuck was that?" and the noises stopped. Almost like whatever it was heard us. The next thing we heard was the sound of something very large breaking through the heavy brush of the woods below us, and before we knew it, it was up the bank and standing right in front of us. In the dark, I couldn't quite see it, but I could tell that it was huge, and there was a smell as well, almost like crossing a dead skunk in a deep bog. I mean, it was nasty. My buddies took off, leaving me because I was too slow to react. I mean, I was scared, but sort of curious too. That thing, whatever it was right in front of me. I could feel its breath and hear it breathing. It was only there for a second or two, and then I too started running. The thing took off after us, and I could hear its feet on the gravel behind me. It stopped chasing us just as we broke out onto the road and headed up to a main street. I chanced to look back, and I could see its shadow just inside the brush. Whatever it was big. I mean, a lot bigger than a man, and I have never seen a bear move like that. The bank it climbed up to get to us was over a 45-degree angle and loose gravel and stone and covered with vines and heavy brush. We tried to climb it the next weekend, and it took the best of us over 5 minutes to do it. At the time, we never bothered to look for tracks, but one interesting note. I stated above that there were junked cars on the south side of the rail bed, one of those being an early 60s station wagon, a big, heavy car. My friends and I had been in that area a week or so before, and the car had been on its wheels. The weekend after the occurrence, the car was on its roof, and pieces were ripped from it and scattered around. That really scared me, and I haven't been back there since. The second encounter I had was just as strange as the first. Me and a friend were cruising in his old 85 LTD station wagon, the ultimate touring vessel as it were, and just out enjoying the late September weather. And it was a beautiful September night in 1993. We drove up this four-wheeler trail to the point where everyone parties, and every hick town has one of those. The trail heads for Westport, New York at that point. He wheeled the car around and parked with the rear facing the woods, the nose facing down the road we had just come in on. We were just talking about the town, friends, plans, just stuff. I happened to look out the back window, and I could see something coming up behind the car. The LTD wagon had huge taillights, and there was no guard over the license plate light, so the back of the car lit up the area nicely. This thing was big, black, and it had its arm out like it was going to open the door on the driver's side. The part that scared me the most was the fact that the rear hatch of the wagon did not latch. It just kind of moved around and thumped when you hit a bump, that sort of thing. It was one of those things Matt was going to fix, but never did. Anyway, I looked at Matt and asked calmly, "Did you lock the doors?" "Why?" "Something's about to open the door." Matt slammed the gear shift into drive and we took off out of there. I looked back and the thing stood up. It had to be over 7 feet tall. It was huge and black, and its eyes must have caught the taillight's glow because there was a red flicker in them. We never stopped until we got down to Port Henry, which was 6 or 7 miles away. I live in a rural part of New York, just outside the blue line of the Adirondack Park, and I know what bears look like, and I know how they behave. Each of these encounters was no bear, and I still don't know what to call each of them. It seems to fit the Sasquatch theory, but why were they out there in the middle of nowhere? Where I live, they already have the tourist hook, the Lake Champlain monster. Every year, people with out-of-state plates flood the little town looking for the elusive critter. It's been almost 10 years since my first encounter, and a scant 5 since my last, and I still have no idea what exactly chased out of the woods that we used to play in. What Was Watching Us? Submitted by Old Troll. I had this experience in my late teens whilst out with my boyfriend, the father of my kids now, and now ex-husband. We, that is, myself and Gray, my then boyfriend and husband-to-be, were out on a sunny evening, just chilling in the car on a local common in the Kempsey area, Midlands, UK. This is open land that is set aside as public land, and it's used for free grazing mostly. We'd been picking apples and chatting, just enjoying the view in peace. But as the evening wore on, it got cooler, and as it got darker, we sat in the car together. We didn't have our own place, still living with parents and not much spare cash, so we spent most of the time together for free. Listening to some music and the cozy lights from the faint orange glow of the motorway nearby, it made an idyllic place to be. The common was very large, bottlenecked by a small group of trees, making it feel as though it was in 2 parts. We were in the part nearest to the motorway, and the common and motorway at this point were separated by a high hedgerow and trees. There was a long, private paddock in between the motorway and common, which was narrow and ran the whole length of the side we were parked on in the common. The paddock had a lower hedge and random bushes within it, and was edged with a wooden fence. As we cuddled up, I happened to catch a movement at the corner of my eye. This movement came from within the paddock. I whipped my head around to look that way, but saw nothing. Everything looked shadowy, and it was probably a trick of that orange light. I didn't mention seeing anything to Gray, and presumed that there may have been a pony on the other side of the fence, which, of course, would not have been unusual. We stayed parked there for a couple of more hours, and things got a little more romantic in the car, but thankfully didn't go too far. But again, I saw something move outside in the paddock. I still didn't mention it, though it seemed a little creepier now as it was getting so late. I decided to multitask and kept a lookout to see if I could spot what it was that had been catching my eye. After a while, I saw it. I saw what looked at first to be a plastic bag inflated by the breeze caught on a bush just bobbing about. It seemed shiny and smooth and, well, was just bobbing there. I thought it seemed as if the bag, if that's what it was playing peekaboo. It didn't seem to have a mind of its own in a weird way, and that orange light didn't help to focus at all. Then I looked and thought that it looked as though it had 2 dark pits that looked like eye sockets. I mean, now I was creeping myself out. Suddenly, it popped up from over the back of the bushes, and I saw then that it did seem to definitely have pitted dark eye-looking patches, but also a thin, shadowy-looking indent, too, for a mouth. What looked like a mouth looked wide and thin, just really friggin' weird. I was just about to turn away and refuse to look anymore before my imagination could get even more carried away, when suddenly it lunged to the side and peered out near the bottom of the bushes. I went rigid. There was no way that was a bag, or that there was enough breeze to make it do that if it was a bag. Getting really edgy recalling this. I'm shuddering now thinking about it and visualizing the whole fucking thing over again. I struggle with the idea of it even now. It all seemed so surreal, and I was not imagining anything or making images in my head. This was a real thing. I always remember it as reminding me of one of those creatures in the old Doctor Who programs with John Pertwee. I don't know what it was called, but it had no neck, and a bald-domed head in a dark grayish color. So I tried to tell Gray, but it all came out as gibberish. I mean, I was hysterical. I ranted, "Move! Move the fucking car!" Well, I was literally clambering on him to try to start it myself. I can't drive, and I hit him in the face with my elbow accidentally and grabbed the scruff of his t-shirt while I was ranting. I understand now what a shock it had to have been to him. I mean, he hadn't seen it, but at the time I was beside myself with terror. And to add to that, Gray was good at buying old bangers, crappy old wrecks with a habit of not starting, and that was not reassuring me at that moment in time. I mean, this guy had a car once that he had to fetch a bloody hammer from his boot to whack down his aerial, and he would have to open his window to reach out to open his door. I mean, I was shuddering. The red flags were all there at that early stage. But, in his defense, Gray was a grafter and earned good money. He just refused to use it. Gray started the car and revved it, speeding off along the edge of the bushes lining the paddock, following the flat, drivable area around the common that led to the other side through the bottleneck and out to the roads. As this thing had been facing the car, we sped off to its left at high speed, quickly heading past where the trees stood between us and that paddock instead of bushes. I mean, I was rigid, willing that car to keep going at least to the road. And it did. As we approached civilization, Gray slowed down and wanted to know what the hell had just happened. I told him as best as I could, and he suggested it was my imagination, or maybe a peeping Tom just perving out. The following day, Gray pulled up to see me. It was a bright day, and although I wasn't over what had happened, I felt braver. I mean, after all, it was daytime. We agreed to pop back over to the common to where we had parked so I could try to prove something was there last night. I mean, I really felt I needed to. For Gray, and for my own mind. The grass was very long in that paddock, and unlike the heavily grazed grass of the common, and therefore, thanks to Detective Me, there would have been flat grass where this thing had sat, proving someone was there. We pulled back up in the same spot as we parked the night before. Now I was all brave. So much I was the first out of the car and heading over to the paddock fence, ready to prove my case. I stopped dead. I felt sick and lightheaded at what I saw. Gray caught up to me and peered over the fence too. My eyes were watering as I pointed to him to the flattened long grass in the paddock. The grass was flattened. It was about the width of a large tractor's back tire if it laid flat on its side, and probably as heavy too. But the track was long, as if its said tractor tire was then dragged all the way alongside the whole length of the common. If that wasn't bad enough, it flattened the grass in the direction in which we had fled. It was following the car when we sped off, but it was fucking crawling or slithering after the car, I don't know. We saw no other tracks that might have given any idea of which way it had come into the paddock. I can only tell you and describe it as I saw it, and as Gray saw the tracks with me after. We cannot make sense of it, but Gray understood why I reacted the way I did, now. The place is not right, bloody creepy area. Over the years there have been so many experiences of mine and people that I know. Some say it's the unrest of a troubled city. Holiday Inn by Obnox. I was 7 years old, and my sister was 5. We were in a hotel room in Carlsbad, New Mexico with our father. Early in the morning, around 1:15, I woke up and heard a strange sound. There was silence for a bit, and then I heard it again. A very unpleasant moan that slowly grew louder and higher and began to quiver and wail. It was fucking unearthly and terrifying, and I didn't know what the hell it was. It went on for about a full minute before dying off abruptly, and there followed a minute of silence. It had been so close it might have been in the bathroom. I got up and checked the bathroom, but there was nothing there. As I headed back to bed, it started up again. I was really fucking creeped out, and I was suddenly scared that whatever it was, it would hear me moving, and even hear me breathing. I quietly crept back to bed and lay there in a state of terror as it continued to come and go, lasting about a minute each time, with a minute in between to gather energy for the next wail. Whatever it was out there, I didn't think it was human. After 5 minutes of this shit, I was pretty sure I was getting ready to scream, and then it would come and kill me, whatever it was. I've never known anything approaching this level of terror I felt that night. It was more than I could bear listening to that thing. At this point, my sister woke up, and she heard it too, and it absolutely freaked her shit right out. Her eyes were bugging out of her head, and she was whimpering. We sat there in silent terror to several more of the wailing shrieks coming from just the other side of this wall. And then we finally woke our father up. Oddly, the screams stopped once we woke him up. He didn't believe us that we'd heard anything important, but we were so insistent that something was wrong, we made him call the front office and asked them to call the police to come check it out. He soon went back to sleep. I was awake till dawn, and I don't think my sister slept much either. We were still fucking terrified. In the morning, we were zombified from the lack of sleep. Dad went out to get some breakfast. When he came back, he suddenly had us pack up everything, and we were in the car before we even had a chance to eat breakfast. He whisked us out of town and found another hotel about 25 miles down the road, and he checked us in before 9 a.m. We could tell something had freaked him out, but he refused to talk about it. Of course, one man is no match for two children, and by that evening we had gradually worn him down, and he slowly told us what had happened. A man had been stabbed to death right behind our room, not 10 feet from where my sister and I crouched in abject terror. I'm never going back to a Holiday Inn. The attack was slow and brutal. It took the guy 40 minutes to die, and we only heard the last 10 minutes or so. And of course, two little kids like us, we were just gobsmacked. The whole thing was a total mindfuck. I can still hear those fucking screams today, and I could never do them justice. It was the fucking scariest experience of my life. The Thing in the Sky by Anonymous. I had just gotten off of work and was driving home at 10:50 p.m. on a May evening in 2017. I usually take the back roads home and got on a road outside of Sunnyside, Washington. And after about 3 minutes or so traveling down the road, I noticed an orange light near two red lights in a triangular pattern in the sky. The orange light was blinking. At first I thought maybe the object was a Chinook helicopter, but then I found it strange how low it was to the ground and its lack of sound. I also noticed it was traveling a bit fast to be a helicopter as it flew from the south to the north. Then I thought maybe the object was a drone. At that time I was going about 50 miles an hour, though I noticed I was slowing down, not wanting to get too close to this object. It crossed the road in front of me, and I proceeded to pass it. An oncoming car passed me, and once it did, I pulled into a dirt driveway and turned around, doing a U-turn. I quickly drove back and found that the object was in the same area I had left it. I then slowed down in the middle of the road with no place to pull over. I just simply stopped in the middle of the road, now able to see a mile in front of me and a mile behind. I was facing west with my back to the east, and this thing seemed to stop flying south, and then began to fly west. I quickly reached for my smartphone and pulled up my camera app, and I began to record as it drew closer. This is when I noticed a white light, much like a star, starting to fly down from above this object. It quickly got my attention as it quickly stopped and then turned 90 degrees and flew south across the road. Once it had done this, the object began to fly west. So now the object is flying parallel to the road, and it began to make me afraid. It stopped and then began to fly northwest from its location directly towards me, and I did become overwhelmed with fear knowing that this was not a plane or a helicopter. Having both of my windows down, I would have heard something like that, but I didn't, so I threw my phone in the passenger seat and began to speed off. As I began to pass it, I came as close as I ever was to this thing. I could see that it was a gray triangle with 3 orange lights and 1 red glowing light in the middle, with 2 smaller green lights near the rear. I could tell it was hovering there, and now I was driving back where I had come from, heading into Sunnyside on Factory Road. I looked down and noticed I was doing about 97 miles an hour, and I quickly began to slow down, feeling safer that I was near town, also realizing that it was near 11 p.m., and when I got there, no one would be around anyway. I turned left onto another road, and before getting to the Yakima Valley Highway, I turned left onto another road that was near a car dealership and stopped again to see if I could see it. The object was flying west again and was in the same light configuration as when I first saw it, with one blinking orange light and two red ones. I watched it fly for a short time before it began to fly southwest, and I didn't want to get too close to it again, and I didn't want it getting too close to me. So I got back onto the road and onto Yakima Valley Highway and drove towards Grandview. Once I got home and out of my vehicle, I looked up in the sky and saw the craft again. It had followed me approximately 6 miles and was flying southeast. I didn't turn around, I just watched it fly in that direction until it was out of sight. For a minute I thought about following it, but I didn't want to push my luck as I began to feel afraid again. So I went inside and reviewed the video I had recorded, but unfortunately the object was not captured due to it being too dark outside. And I also had stopped recording when it passed me the first time, and I pressed pause as I threw my phone onto the seat. What was that thing? Skinwalker by Anonymous. This happened in the Window Rock, St. Michael's area at my cousin's place. It was about 2 a.m, and my sister, her cousin, and our niece were sleeping outside in the back of our pickup. My sister was just gazing at the stars, but soon she heard the dogs cross the ditch to bark. Now, our cousin says that whenever that happens, it most likely means something is coming over, so she was up just listening, and then she just happened to glance up and saw something black crouching over them, sitting on the roof of the cab. She froze. She couldn't move at all. She couldn't speak. She was struggling so hard to do something to scream or move, but she couldn't. Her cousin woke up because she felt her struggling against her, and my sister told her what happened, and they woke up the other niece. Now all of them were awake. By then, the dark, shadowy figure was gone. My sister went to the house where everyone else was sleeping except me. I was asleep in the van next to the truck. And as soon as she got to the front door, her cousins and our niece were shining their flashlights all around, and just happened to shine them up the hill behind the house, and we saw something run up the hill. And here's the funny part. As soon as they both saw it, they flew from the back of the truck to the front porch in seconds. I was laughing. My other sister woke up my mom and my cousin's brother's wife, telling them what had happened, and our niece got her dad's gun and shot a couple of times up the hill to scare whatever it was away. I fell back asleep, and my sister woke me up to go inside the house a little later, and she and her cousin and our niece were going to stay outside to watch over things. My cousin and niece both promised to stay up, but soon fell asleep, leaving my sister awake and alone. She then heard something running up the hill and down near the corral. Was it a skinwalker? My sister was getting fed up, and she and her cousin and niece decided to go inside once she woke them up. Once they were inside, my mom began to mumble in her sleep as if she was talking to something or rebuking something in the name of Christ. We were Christians. We woke my mom up and asked her what was wrong, and she said she had a dream of something barging in through the door to kill us, but she rebuked it and it stopped it from coming in. At that time, my sister sensed something on the other side of the door. Something was sitting outside, doing God only knows what, and while this was going on, my other sister was in our house in Tempe. She called us and asked us if we were okay, because I guess a skinwalker had been reported down there doing some other stuff, and all the pets in the area were spooked, and something was banging on the bathroom window while my sister was taking a shower for work. All of this took place between 2 and 4 in the morning, and as soon as it got daylight out, my sister, our mom, my cousin, and our niece went outside to inspect the place. We found strange tracks and followed them up the hill to a spot where it looked like something had been sitting due to all the flattened grass that we saw. When I had first gone inside when my sister woke me up when everything began, I had left my shoes in the van, and we locked the doors, which my sister had double-checked. But when I went to get my shoes, I found blood on my left shoe, and I knew it wasn't there before. I freaked out and told my mom, and she told me to say a prayer and simply wash the blood off my shoe. I guess something was supposed to happen after they rubbed the blood on my shoe, but nothing ever did happen to me. I'm very grateful for that. Although my family is Christian and we rely on Christ's blood for protection against the evil powers of the Skinwalkers, we do have a very healthy respect of the traditional ways of protection that my grandmother still knows and teaches us. Night on the Tower, submitted by Racer X. I'll call myself Nate for this story. Back in 1987, I had a friend who I'll call Jake, and he liked to climb anything that was taller than he was, legal or illegal. Bridges, grocery stores, electrical towers, you name it. Well, one night, I and another friend of mine, who for this story I'll call Tom, we were all hanging down in the basement at Jack's place, smoking cigarettes, drinking some beers while watching whatever was on cable at the time. Then Jack spoke up, stating that he felt like going climbing, and I looked at Tom, then back at Jack and said, "Climbing what?" Jack said, "Well, hey, there's this water tower about 10 miles from here, over on State Street by the side of that shopping center." I said, "Yeah, I know it. I drive by it heading to Tom's house," and Jack said, "Yeah, that's the one." Tom piped in, "Jack, why do you want to climb that tower? There's a chain link with barbed wire at the top all the way around it." Jack said, "Well, I want to drop a raft with a pull cord inside it and paddle around. It'd be fun, and I'm aware of the barbed wire, but I know there's an area that has been dug up a little under the fence towards the back, so entering the area should be a piece of cake. And hey, have you ever seen down from the top of the tower? I gotta verify that." And I said, "Oh, okay, but a raft? Tonight? Are you fucking nuts?" No rafting tonight, but I want to case the place and see if it's possible." So Tom said, "Hey, that sounds cool to me. What time are we talking?" Jack said, "Well, hey, look, it's only 9:30, so I'm thinking, hey, maybe around 11:30 or midnight. And that way all the stores will be long closed, and if there's any traffic, it'll be maybe a car here and there every hour." Tom said, "Hey, I'm in." And I said, "Wait a minute. What's the escape plan if we're spotted?" "I don't know. Run like hell," said Jack. "Don't worry. Look, there's 3 of us, so everyone watch each other's back." I looked at him and then said, "Oh, great. That makes me feel a whole lot fucking better. How about I wait by the car so no one steals it, tows it away, or something to that effect?" Tom looked at me and said, "Dude, don't be a pussy, Nate. Just be cool and keep your eyes open and everything is going to be fine." I said, "Yeah, right. Fine. Nothing ever is and you know it. Like back when..." I kind of stopped in mid-sentence, caught myself. "Never mind. Let's do it so Jack can get his fix." Tom said, "Hey, I knew you'd be ready to go." And I said, "Fuck it, whatever." Tom was right. I've wanted to climb that water tower, but just never did. I guess it was the fear of being caught. My father told me one time that if I ever did anything stupid, crazy, fun but illegal that landed me in jail, that he would not be bailing me out. So I really enjoyed my freedom and didn't do things like that. 11:30 came around. Jack stood up, finished his beer, and told us it's time to roll. I put out my smoke and looked at Tom, rolling my eyes, and headed outside to Jack's car. Tom followed me out with Jack coming out a minute later with a flashlight. We all piled into Jack's 4-door sedan, and Tom was riding shotgun with me in the back seat, and we went to the water tower. We arrived at the shopping center by the water tower, and Jack parked his car in a parking space that was closest to a dumpster. We all bailed out, with me scanning the parking lot like some ninja you see in the movies. Tom perked up. "Yo, Jack, what's next?" "Well, the way in is over in the back under the fence." So I said, "Well, let's do this before anybody just happens to drive up on us." Tom said, "Dude, you worry too much." And I said, "Hey, you'll thank me one day for all my worrying." Jack said, "Hey, shut the fuck up. Let's stop the chit-chat." All 3 of us moved quickly to the back side of the fence area that had this opening, and Jack pulled on the fence, and Tom dropped down and squeezed through. Jack looked at me and motioned me to go under, but I was hesitant and finally ended up squeezing through as well, but my leg caught on the bottom of the chain link fence. Fuck, it hurt, but I didn't want to make any noise, so I looked up at Jack and gave him the finger. Of course, Jack laughed a little bit, but whispered, "Sorry, man." After I stood up, Tom and I held up the fence, and Jack squirmed under following us. After we all dusted the dirt off of ourselves, Jack pointed to the ladder at the base of the water tower. After I looked around to see that the coast was still clear, I followed them both to the ladder, and Jack started climbing first. Tom followed Jack, and I was the third man up. As I got halfway up the ladder, my arms started to tighten up, and I heard a car. I was thinking, oh shit, we're fucked. But the car continued on, and I breathed a sigh of relief, but my arms were still tight, and I felt like I wasn't going to make it to the top. So I stopped for a minute and looked down, which was a big mistake, especially now that the wind was blowing. I looked up at Tom, and he was a good lead ahead of me, and Jack, well, shit, he was already at the catwalk that went around the water tower. Fuck, this is such bullshit, I thought, but I ended up pushing on. Another 10 minutes, and I was on the catwalk with Tom and Jack. As I was rubbing my arms, I looked at Jack and said, "Well, buddy, here we are, nice view. You satisfied?" "No," he said. "Not yet." What are you talking about?" Jack said, "We're only halfway there." I looked at Jack and then at Tom and made the question motion with my arms. Jack said, "We need to climb the second ladder. You know, the rollaway ladder at the very top? You know, where the manhole cover is located?" I looked up and shook my head. Hell no. Man, there are no railings or anything to hold on to, for Christ's sake. Jack said, "Man, just be careful. When you reach the top, don't stand up and scoot on your ass to the right." I looked at Tom. Dude, are you doing this?" Tom said, "Well, might as well. I mean, we came all the way out here from Expectant, didn't we?" I just looked at both of them, shook my head and said with a sigh, "Okay, let's go." Jack smiled and started climbing up the rollaway ladder. Now, for those of you who don't know what a rollaway ladder is on a water tower, let me just tell you that this ladder, while walking on the catwalk, you could roll the ladder around to a point where you would need to climb. You lock it in place and then climb up. The only problem is, once you reach the top, there's nothing to hold on to, and if a heavy wind comes, or maybe you slip, you're going to fall to your death. So with all that being said, all three of us climb up on this ladder to the very top of the water tower, and me scooting to the right on my ass, Tom scooting to the left on his, and Jack crawls to the center. Talking in a low voice, Jack said, "Hey, this is the top, man. Night's clear. If you look ahead, you can see downtown." Tom and I looked in the direction Jack was pointing, and lo and behold, there were the lights of downtown. It was pretty cool, and the breeze felt great as I had been sweating. I could see a few cars drive by when I heard some squeaking of rusty metal. I turned to see Jack opening the manhole cover, or more like a lid, of the water tower. Tom scooted over, and they were both looking in, so I too scooted over and looked down into the darkness. "Can't see shit," I said. "How much water do you think is in there?" Jack said, "I don't know, let's see." So he took his small flashlight, but inside it was still very hard to tell. Tom pulled out a nickel and dropped it. A second later, we heard a plop, and we all looked up at each other. "Seems to be full," said Jack. I said, "Yeah, good, I agree." Then Jack pointed with his flashlight to a steel hook right inside the manhole, and then told us that he could hook a rope to it and drop down to blow up a raft and paddle around. Tom and I laughed at him and told Jack that he would be on his own if that was his mission. Jack told me we'd be missing out, and simply closed the lid. As he was doing this, I heard 2 vehicles pulling up to the base of the water tower next to the fence. I motioned to Tom and Jack to shut up.
Did you guys hear that?
Tom and Jack both answered.
No.
In a whispering voice, I told both of my friends that there are 2 cars below us and to keep quiet. Tom, in a whispering voice, asked me why 2 cars would be stopped below us, and I gave him the hell if I know motion and slid as much as I could without falling off and peered over the edge. I could only see 1 car, but this 1 car had a number painted on the top of it next to a bar of lights. I quickly scooted back and turned to Tom and Jack.
Cops! Oh, fuck, are you serious?
Then we all started hearing police radio chatter.
Okay, assholes. Does that answer your question?
Tom just rolled his eyes and laid all the way down staring up at the sky. I looked at Jack and we followed suit. So we all just laid there on top of the world, and we could hear the police radios as the breeze blew over us, and I was waiting to hear possible trespassers seen on or around the neighborhood water tower, and even though there was a nice breeze, I was still sweating bullets. After 20 minutes or so, we all realized these 2 officers are just sitting in their squad cars bullshitting. And I'm thinking, why the fuck can't you 2 guys go do this at a gas station? Or a grocery store parking lot? Hell, a donut shop. I don't care. And I know there are people breaking the law elsewhere, so get going now because, man, I gotta take a piss. No dice. After almost an hour, we finally heard the squad cars start up and pull out onto the street, heading in different directions. We all breathed a sigh of relief, but remained still for another 10 minutes, just in case we got any more surprise visitors, like a few different coppers wanting to park and chat. By now, I was ready to roll. My sightseeing was over, so I spoke up. All right, gents, I think we need to get down now. Tom agreed. Yeah, I think you're right. Jack was being an asshole and said, so, no camping up here tonight? And I said, okay, funny man, where's that ladder? Jack grabbed the ladder and climbed down to the catwalk, followed by Tom, and then me. My heart was finally starting to slow down a bit as we got ready to start the climb down the main ladder. After we took a deep breath, Tom started climbing down, and I followed Tom. But then Jack spoke up. Well, guys, I'll see you at the bottom. Then Jack proceeded to climb over the catwalk railing, and I was saying to myself, what the fuck? Then Jack grabbed hold of one of the cross beams that are crisscrossed and bolted to the legs of the tower and slides zigzag-like all the way to the bottom. 10 minutes later, Tom and I reached the bottom, and there's Jack leaning on the fence. Hey, you guys, what took so long? Holy shit, you are one crazy nutbar, I said. Yeah, maybe so, but where's the thrill of just climbing down a ladder? Tom said, yeah, Nate, where's the thrill? And I said, hey, I didn't see you dive over any railing, Captain Useless. And Tom said, well, I would have if I wasn't wearing my leather jacket. I finally said, whatever, and I got up to go take a piss. So with that, we crawled under the fence back to the legal side and headed back to Jack's car. At first, the part of the ride back to Jack's was in silence, but then the silence broke with all of us firing off words of what was done right and wrong. Then Jack says, hey, who needs a beer? Tom said, oh, I do, and I said, yeah, I could use one after I get a clean pair of pants. Jack says, well, I have extra beers at my place, but sorry, no extra pants. Tom said, hey, don't look at me, man. Don't worry, I'm not looking at you, Mr. I Worry Too Much, I said. Tom said, okay, so we had a minor issue. And I said, minor issue? Just remember to listen to me now and believe me later. And with that, we pulled into Jack's condo to finish off the night with some more beers, cigarettes, and now another story to add to the books, because that was not the first or last thing Tom and myself climbed with our crazy friend. But all of that is for another time. Creepy Guy at the Playground by Letheniel. This is my first write-up, and English is my third language, so there may be some syntax or grammatical errors. First, I have to start with a bit of background since it's somewhat vital to this case. This took place about 20 years ago when I was still very young, around 7 or 8 years old. Growing up, my close relatives were scattered over 2 countries, so it wasn't unusual during birthdays to cross the border and visit family. I didn't speak the language, but luckily the grown-ups could all speak mine. So it happened that me and my family crossed the border one day to visit my grandmother for her birthday. Her house was somewhat remote on the edge of town, a quiet location, but ideal for an older woman who enjoyed her quiet. In walking proximity, there was a small playground which we enjoyed visiting whenever we were there. It at least gave us something to do, and the entrance to grandmother's garden was always visible from where we were. So it happened that on this day, me and my little sister were the only ones on this playground, playing as kids do, when we saw an older-looking male with a cane come out of one of the little back house alleyways. He was dressed in a long trench coat and a large cowboy hat on, with rain boots, even though it was a bright sunny day. Something immediately fell off about it, though as a kid I just couldn't place it. My sister and I had climbed onto one of the pieces of playground equipment at this time, elevating us from the ground by several feet, and we were putting our feet at about his chest level. He walked up a short distance away and asked us something in the foreign language, and put his hand in his jacket pocket and offered us some mints from his hand. I told my sister in my native language that she should not take anything and to not turn her back on him. He smiled, showing us that he was missing numerous teeth, which only creeped up the creep factor. I waved my hand in a declining manner to show him that we weren't going to take any candy, and we just started ignoring him while I was talking to my sister, trying to keep her comfortable. This guy didn't let up, and he moved himself into our field of vision again, still talking away at us about stuff we didn't understand. Again, we moved on the playground equipment to move him out of our direct field of view, but enough to still see him from the corner of our eyes. At this point, I'm sure he understood that we didn't speak his language, as he switched to the single word for cat in my native language, pointing to the alley he had come out of. My sister was a big cat lover at that age, like most girls, and immediately wanted to follow him. Climbing off the equipment, she started to walk towards the alleyway before he stopped her. By that point, I had also jumped off to grab her arm and drag her back. He waved his finger in her face to make clear she shouldn't go in the alley, then pointed to me and made a follow sign. My sister's temper flared at this, and she started throwing a tantrum, not sure if from fear or anger, which angered the man. Dropping his cane, he was on his knees extremely quick. He picked up my sister and held his hand over her nose and mouth. She bit his finger to the point of getting him to bleed, and he dropped on the ground and she made a run for it to Grandma's house. By this time, multiple people had heard the screaming and came out to see what had happened as the male jumped to his feet and ran off, leaving his cane behind. It took me a few years and therapy to process what happened that day. Now, looking back, I'm sure the cane was just a distraction, something to make us think that we were dealing with a feeble old man, someone who wouldn't harm anyone. And if I had gotten in that alley with him, God knows what might have happened. So, creepy old trench coat and rain boots guy, let's not meet again. Maybe the House Doesn't Like Him, by Haven. My parents purchased their retirement house in Mexico almost 25 years ago, and they lived in that house for about 20 years. My children, my siblings, and I have very fond memories of this house. This is where we had all the family gatherings and spent all the holidays. I have a very big family, so during those family gatherings, we filled up all 6 bedrooms with people sleeping on couches and in sleeping bags, on inflatable mattresses in the living room even. One of our favorite things to do, besides eating, was to sit around and tell ghost stories. It seemed like every family member had one to tell. Many of the stories had to do with things that would happen in that house. There was talk about noises at night, shadows, things going missing, blankets pulled, the usual ghost activity. It seemed like almost everyone had experienced something at one time or another. My father passed away in 2010, and my mother moved to Nevada with my sister about 2 years ago. I live and work in San Diego, which is only a few miles away from the house, so I spend most weekends there. At first, the house would be empty all week. My kids and I would go on Friday evenings and return to San Diego Sunday nights so the kids could attend school and I could go to work. My kids loved having 2 houses and living in 2 different countries. They were really taking advantage of the best of both worlds. One Friday evening when we arrived at the house in Mexico, we noticed that the front door was wide open. We also saw some of our things laying out in the front yard. Someone had broken in. They pretty much wiped us out of everything but the furniture. We were devastated, not so much for the material things they took, but because we no longer felt safe. What was I going to do now? I didn't want to stop coming to this big, beautiful house that held so many cherished memories, but someone already knew this house was vacant during the week, and they would keep coming back and taking whatever was there. My kids and I didn't get much sleep that night, but the next morning we went out to warn our neighbors in case the thieves struck again. We went across the street and spoke to the housekeeper, and she had lived in that house with her 2 children for the last 15 years. The owners of the house traveled a lot, so most of the time they were gone, and after telling her of the break-in, she confided that the owners of the house where she had lived had sold the house and had given her only 2 months to move out. I immediately saw this as a sign. This was the answer to my prayers. I made her an offer. Come stay across the street in my house. She wouldn't have to pay rent, only split the bills with me, and they could have the 2 bedrooms downstairs, and they would pretty much have the house all to themselves during the week. She loved the idea, so 2 months later, they moved in. Patty and her son and daughter have been staying in my house since October of 2017. The living arrangements worked out great. We both have teenage daughters that became instant best friends, and Patty's son Adrian is 25 years old, and he is the nicest guy. He works all day, yet still has time to do the much-needed handiwork around the house. He has a 7-year-old son, Ian, that lived with his mom and only got to see every other weekend. Adrian and Ian's mom had an agreement that Ian could come live with Adrian when he started school. Well, Ian started school a few weeks ago and is now living in my house. For the last couple of weeks, we have all noticed some weird things going on around the house, and at first, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to scare them off, but there are things you just can't ignore or pretend didn't happen. Last Saturday, I was in the kitchen making lunch, and everyone was outside cleaning the yard and watering the plants. I noticed some of the doors to the pantry and cupboards in the kitchen were open, so I would close them, only to find them open seconds later, and this happened several times. I kept hearing growling noises coming from a broom closet, so I checked it out several times, and there was nothing there. When we were all having lunch in the dining room, 2 cups that were sitting on the breakfast bar just slid across and fell, and we all witnessed that. Adrian told us that a couple of days before, he was dozing off on the living room sofa when a pillow was thrown at him, and he was the only one home. I was in the restroom Saturday night when one of my decorative towels fell off the rack, and this towel never gets used. It's neatly folded and hung from the middle. My son keeps insisting that we're having earthquakes because he feels his bed shake at night, but nobody else feels these earthquakes, and they're not reported on the internet. The whole house has this weird vibe that it didn't have before, even if we would hear and see things on occasion. Now the house suddenly feels big, cold, and dark, and not welcoming. It's hard to explain. You feel like you're being watched all the time, and I'm a grown woman afraid to go to the restroom at night now. These are just some of the things that are happening in my house. We all lived with peace and quiet for months and cannot think of any change other than Ian moving in. And we're all really freaked out right now. I'm getting ready to do a house cleansing, but need some advice. Could it be that Ian brought something with him, or maybe something in the house doesn't like him? If so, will cleansing the house help since it's not really the house, but something attached to Ian? I haven't told anybody in the house my theory about Ian being the cause of the ghost activities, and I feel bad saying it out loud. After all, he is just a kid. and I don't want to offend anyone. Thoughts? The Park, submitted by Bull Diesel. This story really gives me goosebumps every time I think about it. When I was younger, I had heard stories that the park by my house was haunted, and I have a friend that's really into the paranormal, just like I am. And for the sake of the story, I'll call him Bob. I had told him the stories that I had heard about the park, so one night, we decided to check it out. We got to the park around 8 p.m., and before I go on with the story, let me explain how the park is laid out. On one end, there is an entrance exit that you drive through, and I'll call that entrance A. After a short drive, you come to another entrance exit to the park, and I'll call that entrance B. Bob and I go into the park through entrance A, and we parked in the first parking lot we came to. We got out of the car, and I started out on a walking path that goes through the park. After a few minutes, I started getting a feeling of being watched, and Bob started getting the same feeling. We heard some brush moving around about 20 feet from where we were standing. So we walked down to where we heard the noise, and as we got to the spot, we heard something deeper in the brush. I decided to go further in, so I walked in about 25 feet to where I thought the sound was coming from. I waited for about 5 minutes, but heard nothing. So I turned and started walking out. Then suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around to see what it was, and in the darkness, I saw a pair of glowing green eyes. I got the hell out of there as fast as I could. Bob asked me what had happened, and I told him what I saw. At that point, Bob and I left the path and decided to go to the skate park area of the park. As we approached the entrance gate, we both got another bad feeling about what was past it. Being younger and foolish, we ignored those feelings and just kept going. We walked till we found a clearing and decided to sit there and do an EVP session. We were there for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we thought we didn't hear anything. But little did we know, Bob called me a few days later and told me there was something on the recording. I told him to come over so we could listen to it, and what we heard gave me goosebumps and scared the shit out of me. I refused to repeat the message. It was horrible and sounded demonic, and I told him to delete the recording, and nothing happened after that. We were both thankful that there were no residual after effects from our experience in the park that night. The Screaming by Small Town Mind. I was visiting home during summer break when I was 19. My mom had cancer and was receiving treatment at a hospital in a bigger city about 6 hours from our home, so my parents were gone for a few days. Obviously, summer break in a small town with no supervision, I threw a small get-together, and there were about 12 people at my house, drinking, smoking, the usual. My house was on the very edge of a small farming town with just a few neighbors, all spread out about 100 yards or so from each other, with some small fields between. Anyway, about midnight or so, 4 of us guys had gone outside to have a cigarette in the backyard. My folks had finally put up a fence, though it was thin metal like a freaking garage door surrounding the backyard. And after 10 years of open wide space, here was this fence. So, our small group was talking, laughing, drunk and or high as can be, when suddenly, we heard what sounded like a woman screaming from across the distance. Again, we were all fairly messed up at the time, so we just kind of sat and wondered what the hell it was. About a minute later, another scream, followed by what sounded like something slamming against a garage door, echoing across the field from our house. By this point, we were all wondering if we should investigate, call the cops, or just go about our business. A few seconds later, we could barely hear people talking and what sounded like laughing, so we figured it was just another party at another house. We continued with our little party, laughing at how scared we had been, and talking about what possibly could have been going on across the way. After about 5 minutes, we heard footsteps in the grass outside the back fence. As I said, fields surrounded the house. Then someone started banging on the back fence. Not the gate, but the side of the fence, the metal garage-type door fence. It was loud as hell. At that point, I think we all had the same idea. We're 19, we're drunk or high. It's time to get inside, lock the doors, and be as quiet as possible. And that was the end of it. Time passed. Mom died from the cancer, and my family moved away from the small town. But a few years later, I was visiting an uncle and read in the newspaper that a missing persons case had been solved. A woman had been beaten, stabbed numerous times, and buried beside the back porch of a house. It was her cousin's house, and it had something to do with an argument over some drugs from what I read. But it was in the general vicinity of where we had heard those noises a few years back. Nothing supernatural, no ghosts, unearthly voices, nothing like that. But had that screaming that night been from that woman? Had that banging on my back fence been from a prank from a friend? Or maybe that person who had killed her had heard us talking and had come over to confront us. No clue. But after talking with my friend about it last year, we both realized that night could have turned out quite differently had we unlocked the gate and walked out to check out that noise. Hey gang, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. Please like, share, and comment on this video, and hey, hit that like button, and also make sure that you hit the little bell that sends out the notifications so you always know when I upload a video. If you care to hear this in podcast format, you can find me on iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And hey, I need your scary stories. Send anything you've got to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Special shout out for Halloween stories. Man, it's coming up fast, and I need your Halloween stories for our great Halloween special. If you feel so inclined, feel free to become a patron on my Patreon page. For as little as $1 a month, you can get all of my content early, and of course have other perks at higher levels. Check it out. Links to everything that I talk about here is in the description below, including all of my social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope to see you there. Everybody, thanks again for listening, and until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.